What's up, guys? Welcome back to our One City YouTube channel. Thank you so much for following us. If it's your first time here, hit that subscribe button, give us a like, right? Give us a subscribe, leave a comment. It helps the ministry a ton. What we're doing is we're just walking through the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, and we're saying, Lord, how do we go about rebuilding our city? And I think it's a huge question we need to begin to ask ourselves, right? Many of our cities are divided racially. Many of our cities are divided politically. Many of our cities are lying in ruins after a difficult 2020 between businesses being shut down with COVID, protests and riots and looting. And I know Minneapolis, I'll be doing another video tomorrow down there in the midst of the rubble, just to give you an idea of the reality of our city. And I believe the impact that God is calling Christians to make in this particular season. We are always so focused on the nations and going to the nations, and there is a call there. And there's no question God is doing incredible work amongst the nations. One of our goals with One City, Minnesota, is to create awareness for the opportunity for urban mission and the call that I believe we have as Christ followers, right, regardless of your background, regardless of your race, your ethnicity, to make an impact in our urban communities, in our cities, for the good news of the gospel. And we're saying, God, is there a blueprint in your word that gives us direction and wisdom and discernment as we think about rebuilding our cities? And over the course of the summer, I got to spend the entire summer in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah and saying, wait, God has given us this blueprint. Are we willing to follow it? And here's the reality of the blueprint. It's super simple. It's not complex. It's not deep, right? It's not like, wow, this is a mind-blowing idea. It's actually really simple. And it was really effective as the exiles returned to Jerusalem with a city that lied in ruins, right? The temple destroyed, the walls destroyed, the political climate destroyed, the economics of the city destroyed, right? The spiritual climate of the city destroyed. Yet these exiles return, and they were given favor by God over a 90-year period of time to begin to rebuild the city. And we believe the blueprint is there. And we're just asking for people to come along this journey with us. We're learning, we're growing. We gather every Thursday night down at Christ Church International, so you're always invited to join us down there as well. But let's jump back into Ezra. We looked at Ezra 1:1, just the idea of God stirring the heart of King Cyrus and how God began to position his people, right, well before the time even occurred for them to rebuild the city. God began to position his people, and in particular the king and Cyrus, to lead this charge back into Jerusalem to rebuild. And we believe God is doing the same with us today, that he is stirring our hearts. He is positioning his people for a real movement that he wants in our urban areas and in our city. So Ezra 1:2 is what we'll jump in today. And this is what it says. It says, "Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem." And we'll just stop there at verse 4. So where do we start? I think that's the question that so many people are asking. Where do we start when we think about the rebuilding of our cities? And we believe God is saying, you start with the church. For Jerusalem in this particular time, that was the temple. And the temple that Solomon had built for the Lord, right, where the Levitical priests would come in and meet with the Lord on behalf of the people, where sacrifices were given, right, to cleanse them of their sin. This temple had been destroyed due to Israel's sin. And now as they're charged to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild, right, what King Cyrus and what the word of God is saying is, we're going to start with the temple. Like there's so many needs everywhere, right? There's needs on every corner. There's needs. Everything seems to be lying in ruins, but yet we have to have a starting point. And so many people have asked, like, why Christ Church International? Like, why are you guys there? And I've had other churches say, well, what about us? And the fact is, like, God has led us to start there. And for the Israelites that were returning out of exile, God said, like, I'm going to have you start with the rebuilding of the temple. And through a series of events, if you've watched prior videos, how the Lord led me specifically to Christ Church International on 13th and Lake Street. Before I had any idea what God was going to do, a burden was placed on my heart for that church. And I think as we think about our urban communities, we think about our city, like, where do we start? Do we start with the feeding program? Do we start with clothing the homeless? Do we start with, right, evangelism? Do we start with, right, economic development? Where do we start? And what I have seen, like, so many Christian organizations and Christ followers, like, where do I start? And there is a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit there. And yeah, it's all good, but I don't think it's where God is asking us to start as we think about the bigger macro of our urban communities in our city. And I believe God is calling us to walk alongside the urban church. I have been blown away by the incredible disparity in resources between the typical, I'm just going to be candid, white evangelical church that sits out in our suburbs and the perimeters of our city, and then the urban church that is often led by black pastors and immigrant pastors. Again, not always. There are exceptions to those rules, but predominantly, right? And there is an incredible disparity in resources to do the work of ministry. And where my heart has been burdened is a lot of these pastors and a lot of these urban churches are sitting in some of the neighborhoods and communities where it is most difficult to do ministry. They're sitting amidst, immigrants and different languages and the movement of Islam and poverty and the homeless. And it's like, we're just like, okay, go do the work of ministry. Hopefully God's favor is there. We know it is here because we have resources, right? And it's like, what if God's favor, as it has been since the beginning, is on his house? And we are called as Christians, whether we have resources, whether our hearts have been stirred, to come alongside the urban church. One of the things that has blown my mind when I first got down into Minneapolis and would begin to hear the heart of different pastors down there is the damage that church planting has done. I'm all about church planting, and that's just, I'm not saying that I'm against church planting, but oftentimes we sit on the fringes of our suburbs and our communities, and we look into the city and say, okay, we want to do something. Well, let's go plant a church. Let's bring our denomination. Let's bring our people. Let's bring our message. Let's bring our resources, and we'll go down and we'll plant a church. And we spend $3 to $4 million on planting and building a building or launching a multi-site, and all the while coming down there, and oftentimes the urban church that is already there is saying, like, hey, we're here. Does anyone see us? And we just kind of fly over the urban church that has already been established. Sometimes the Christ Church has been there 100 years. We fly over those churches to do our own thing, to build our own kingdom, while the black pastor and the immigrant pastor and other pastors in the city are like, hey, we're here. We want to work with you. Like, come alongside of us. Like, let's do ministry together. And I think it's a picture of the book of Acts from, right, starting in Acts 2 as we start to see the formation of the early churches. Like, we're doing ministry together. Like, there was no needy among us, right? Like, whoever had sold to give to who did not have. And the gospel went forth. And I think in our urban communities, like, we're missing it. And one of the goals of One City, Minnesota, is just to create awareness of it, because I don't think people know. And what I have seen is the incredible capabilities of the urban church, right? The incredible people that are already there doing the work of ministry. And I think it's our responsibility, especially for those of us who sit out on the fringes of our city and look in, to come in and say, like, how can I serve you? right? How can I serve your church? How can I serve you? How can I walk alongside of you? How can I give in a way that will help reestablish the church in the community and take the pressure off so you can do the work of ministry in your neighborhood? So all of that to be said, and I'm super passionate about it, and God just continues to stir my heart more and more and more. The more time I spend, the more time I get to know, right, the local pastors and the local community down there. But I think our call, as we think about rebuilding our city, is this idea of church revitalization. Say, who is there doing the work of ministry? How can I walk alongside of them and serve within the current urban church context? That's where we start. And I believe if all of a sudden our churches, our urban churches, become a home base, a light into the community where people know they can go to not only, right, show up on a Sunday, but they can have their needs met there. And as their physical needs are being met, their spiritual needs can be met. And the church starts to take back ground in our city. And that was this idea with King Cyrus, and we're going to see how the people's hearts are stirred to go, right? Is like, let's go back and rebuild the temple. Let's build a community based around the temple that's going to impact all of Jerusalem. Now, we're going to face opposition. We're going to have difficulty. People are going to think we're crazy, right? People are going to think all kinds of things, but that's where they started. And I think God is saying that's where I want my people to start. In 2020, 2021, in the midst of so much chaos, like, go back and let's see the church thrive in our urban communities. And it doesn't have to be us doing our things. Next week, or maybe even towards the end of this week, we're going to do like the 8 essential truths I came across in the reality conference this year. An unbelievable thought. I think sometimes we allow, right, some theological differences that at the end of the day are not hills to die on, that we're willing to die on, that keeps the church separated and everybody fragmented and everybody trying to build their own kingdom. We're saying, like, let's preach the gospel, right? That Jesus came, lived a life you could not live, died a death you deserved to die due to your sin, overcame death so you could have eternal salvation and not be separated from the Father. Let's agree on that. Let's agree on those essentials, and let's go do the work of ministry together. And I think we will begin to see our cities reestablished on a firm foundation, as we're going to see Jerusalem, again, over a long period of time, but as Jerusalem began to be reestablished by the hand of the Lord. Join us tomorrow. We're going to continue to jump in. I'll be down in the city tomorrow. Again, just showing you the realities of our city, and I pray that you will join us. Hit that subscribe button. Come along this journey with us. Join us tomorrow night. We're going to have an awesome community conversation tomorrow night, so we would love for you to join us. 6:30 p.m., Christ Church International. We'll have some food, and we'll spend some time just digging into what God is asking us to do. Love you guys. We'll talk soon.